So for today's agenda, we're going to do some introductions, from a couple different angles quickly. Then we're going to, I'm going to sort of frame sort of the overall, vision of social system mapping to orient us to what we're going to think about today. Then I'm going to separate you into some breakout groups to get familiar with one another and to get familiar with our social system map. And then I'm going to share some theory that my hope is will sort of connect the dots between this sort of high level vision about social system mapping and what we're doing when we're looking at a social system map. And then we're going to, having hopefully sort of connected up some theoretical dots, we're going to go back into breakouts and have you do what we call pattern spotting. So do some pattern spotting together with our map, and then we'll come back together and share the insights that you got from the pattern spotting. And then we'll do a little quick brief review and reflection of today's session. So I'm going to just stop sharing for a second. And because I know some more people came in. Okay, so Sonia, would you like to just unmute and say hi?
Hey, everybody. Good to be here with you.
Welcome. Kate, do you want to unmute and just to do a quick sound check before we move forward?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to meet you all.
Good morning. And Laura, welcome. You want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Morning.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. I'm putting in the chat, I'm putting a link to the Mentimeter tool. If you're not familiar with Mentimeter, don't fret too much about it, but if you click that link, you should be in let me just share my screen again. Oh, I am sharing my screen. So you'll see something that should look kind of like this. And why is it not showing that now? Yeah, and okay. Apologies for my technical challenges. So are people able to open the Mentimeter? Okay, so there's going to be parts of this session where ideally you'll be able to look at my screen and see the results of the Mentimeter input. But there will be also times when you're going to want to go to your screen with the Mentimeter voting stuff where you can put input in. So there'll sort of be a toggling back and forth, and I'll try to alert you to what's the best place to be looking at any given moment. But so we want to start with, so you should be seeing a screen that on your Mentimeter where you can input your name, pronouns, location, and a network or networks that you're supporting in some way. And ideally put them all together in one field so we can connect you to your networks in our minds. I'll give you a moment to do that. And once you've done that, you might want to come back to the screen share of mine so you can see everyone's responses. And if I'm doing something technically that has you stuck and you're challenged, either direct message Kara, who's our producer today, or just unmute and say something. Do our best to help you out. So is everybody able to? I'm seeing some comments, some self-introductions coming. Great, okay. Looks like we're getting them. I think, Elise, you're the first person we've seen in this community from Latvia. So welcome, Latvia, yay. Okay. I'm going to move to the next slide. One thing to know about the Mentimeter interface at the moment, when I go to the next slide, you can still finish putting your information in, but then there will be a little orange button that will pop up saying the presenter has moved to the next slide, and just click that as soon as you're done, and then it will take you to the next slide. So part of our the way we're going to organize the day today is to understand how familiar everyone is with social system mapping. Now, some of you are super familiar and have made a number of these maps yourselves and have worked in your communities for a long time with a social system map. And some of you potentially have never even seen one. So we want to have a sense of where everyone is at with that. So definitely there's a never even seen, and there's a few of you who've made them. You can, once you've input, again, if you come back to the screen share, you'll see the breakout of people's experience. Let's see, we've got 8 people. I think that's just about it. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And this one is, how familiar are you with just sort of general systems thinking concepts? So just things like the iceberg diagram, or, you know, the concept of, you know, the elephant, the 6 blind men and the elephant, and, you know, that there's different perspectives, just sort of the rough, really high level stuff. Okay. And so on this, if you come back to my screen share, you can see that the dots are colored. So by your social system mapping experience. And then so far you all are looking pretty familiar with high level systems thinking concepts, which is great. But if you're not, that's okay. We're set up to help you with that. So I'm going to go to the next screen, and just high level. Social system mapping, which you're going to dig into one of those fairly shortly, is about systemic transformation. That's its sort of highest level purpose. It's about supporting a global movement that is working to shift from systems of dominance and exploitation and extraction to systems of connection and reverence and regeneration. So we recognize that the foundational structure for this global scale systemic shift is strong networks of wise change agents. And so networks are the most ubiquitous structure in the world. And so you'd think it would come really naturally for us to enact change through collaborative networks. I mean, that's kind of been, you know, a thing that we've all been sort of working on, moving into networks, and it seems really natural. But what we've learned over the last decade or two of all this network weaving that much of us has done is that this work is that social change networks are actually really challenging. So we want them and we need them, but sometimes we feel kind of lost about how to make them work. So, and so many people believe that the reason that large-scale systemic transformation is so hard and challenging, and therefore the reason that collaborative networks can be so challenging, is due to 2 fundamental worldviews that are simply just sort of ground into our modern, especially our Western culture. And so these worldviews, they're so deep that we're generally not even aware of them, but they inform everything that we do. And they are the worldview of the separate self, where, you know, everyone has to look out for themselves. Human nature is simply like this dog eat dog, survival of the fittest. And that's just the way it is. And there's nothing we can do about it. So that like deeply ingrained, culturally reinforced worldview is one thing that makes it really hard. One of the reasons it's really hard to really move forward with networks. And the other one is a really linear, mechanistic understanding of how change happens. So collaboration networks and all of the larger systems that we want to change are what we call complex adaptive systems. They're unpredictable, they have a life of their own, they're too complex for command and control approaches, and yet we continuously try to deal with them as if they were, you know, sort of like household appliances, like we're going to change the justice system just by sort of flipping a switch and then change will happen, and generally that makes everything worse. So part of our emerging theory in the social system mapping community is that social system mapping can help address both of those challenges of the separate self and the mechanistic worldview. Social relationships generally, so one of the ways that mapping can help is that the visual dimension helps us understand relational dynamics better. Social relationships generally aren't visible, except at the super small scale. And there's a visual component to cognition, so that being able to actually see relationships can actually impact our appreciation and understanding of them, as well as just the way a map is designed can help us be more strategic about reaching out and developing relationships. It also, we're also undermining that mechanistic worldview with a social system map by, because a social system map can actually be a tool for teaching about complexity in a context that's meaningful and relevant to the people in the map. So it's not, the abstract, big picture complexity conceptually. It's actually the complexity in the context that's really important to me here and now and today with the changes I'm trying to make. So, and it can also be, so as a tool for complexity, it also can inform wiser action and help everyone learn how to manage better in what we call VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous circumstances. So that's my sort of high level explanation of how, what a social system map is trying to do, which is to shift paradigms, and how we feel that it's able to do that, like the specific places where those are the changes can be happening. So I'm gonna put you into breakout rooms. I just want to see, Kara, I'm assuming you've set up the breakouts, and I am. And for those of you,
I'm wondering how many people you'd like to stick into how many groups, if we have maybe too many that I've set up.
Okay, hang on, let me stop sharing so I can. Okay. So what I was thinking was, let's put Mary and Joe and Sarah and Jim and Laura. That almost makes, okay, so let's just have it be who, 4 of you, which 4 of those that I just named is willing to sort of help other people navigate a map in a breakout? Put your hand up or say something. So not Jim, or Jim, can you, no, I'm assuming you're on a phone.
No, I'm here. I'm happy to.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. I hadn't turned my camera on.
It's okay.
I'm happy to help.
Okay, who else? Sarah, can you help? Joe, can you help?
Yep.
Laura, can you help?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So those are the 4 rooms, Kara, and then just distribute everybody else across those 4 rooms. So what I'm gonna, as Kara's doing that, I'm gonna, we're gonna give you 10 minutes. I'm gonna have you introduce yourselves to one another. Share your experience levels so that you know who has never seen a social system map and probably needs you to just sort of help them understand how to navigate, and who is experienced, so that we can see those 2 differences that are in each of these small containers of the breakout rooms. And then, so get to know each other a little bit, and then open up. Oh, Kara, do we have the embed link to the map?
Ooh.
You have it? Okay, so go ahead and put the embed link to the map in the chat. And so we'll have, especially the person who's comfortable with the map, open up the embed link, but you all will have your own, so you can also navigate on your own. But then the more experienced person, just sort of introduce the others to the offers and asks view and the involvement view, and just so show people how filters work so that they can start to navigate. So just get ideas to get familiar with each other and the map to the degree you're able. And you'll have 10 minutes. And Kara, are we ready to break them out?
I'm ready to go.
You're ready to go? Any questions before we go? Is everybody ready? Y'all good? Okay. Send them away. Thank you. Cool, welcome back. So hopefully you've gotten a list, for those of you who are new to a map, at least a little bit comfortable with one another and with a social system map. And also, so we talked about the paradigms, that the 2 what I think of like the highest, the deepest level paradigms that contribute to making network work hard and to shifting to more generative paradigms, the separate self and the mechanistic approach. You've seen a map, and then, so how is it that we're connecting this idea of broad systemic change with social system mapping? Because I think that for most of us, at least in the beginning, it's a bit of a stretch to look at a map that looks, I'm going to share my screen. I know you've just seen this, but that looks like this, which looks kind of overwhelming and messy, and at first glance can be pretty confusing and meaningless to most people. And see how that connects to large scale systemic change. So that's what we're here to look at today and to think about, that connection between this messy thing you see here and large scale change. So I'm going to whip through a little handful of theories. I think probably most of you are familiar with them, but I just want to draw out a couple of high level points from each of these theories so that I can then connect them to a map. And then once we've done that, we'll have you go back into your breakouts and do a little bit of practice together. Before we do that breakout, or before we do that, Joe, I know sometimes you have to leave at the top of the hour, and I want to know, are you sticking around or are you leaving at the top of the hour? Because we'd have to redo our breakouts if you're leaving.
Yeah, today, yes, I will be leaving at the top. But for the rest of only today I'm gone.
Okay. So Kara will, for those of you who were with Joe, we're going to put you in a different breakout, and we just had somebody else enter the space, so she'll put that person in a different breakout. So all the breakouts expect a little bit of difference when you go back into them. I'm sharing my screen, and I think you can just watch from the screen and not be in Mentimeter at the moment. But Kara, can you put the link to Mentimeter for that new person who just came in, or DM it to that person so that they're able to get into Mentimeter? Okay, thanks. So I am sharing my screen, right? People can see it. Okay, so this is one model I'm going to whip through. I'm guessing most of you have seen it. It's a visualization of Donella Meadows' work on systems thinking from her book, Thinking in Systems. And this shows the kinds of things that we can pay attention to in a system when we're trying to impact it. So, and it's arranged by where you can get the most bang for your buck. So where's the most potential? Where can you get the biggest shift in a system with the least amount of energy is up here. But so depending on the context, any or all of these things that you can pay attention to are necessary. But the further to the right you go, the greater the leverage you're going to have. And so if we start down here at the lower left, these white arrows, these are all technical solutions. So for instance, let's say we want to influence the issue of homelessness at the lower right. So if we're like going to just look at it from this very first thing we can pay attention to on the fulcrum, which is constants, parameters, numbers, we might say, okay, we're going to make more beds available in homeless shelters, and that's how we're going to deal with homelessness. Then if we might go up to so then these are technical, numbery kinds of that mechanical, that mechanistic paradigm stuff down here. And then up here are these leverage points are human leverage points, how people think and feel and make decisions. And so if we go to this first orange one, which is information flow structures, we might be, and we're still talking about homelessness. So in this area, we might start doing more research about homelessness, and we might have more, communication campaigns in the hopes that then we'll change the system rules, the policies that impact homelessness. So we might try to increase information flow structures and hoping that that will impact policy, which are in the realm of human leverage points. But if the system goal, this first red one, if the whole goal of the system, of the policies that are made, is to not force comfortable middle class or affluent people to have to think about poverty and trauma and the impacts of our economic system, then no matter how the policies get tweaked, and no matter how many beds we add to homeless shelters, then no matter what, we're not really going to solve the problem. We'll just sort of jiggle it around a little bit, so it'll bounce around a little, and then it will settle right back into pretty much the way the system has always been. So we all understand intuitively and implicitly, if not in this systemic, logical way, we understand that these value-based leverage points in a system, we all understand them because we just know that a system that valued life and all of its forms, and all of the connections, the interconnectedness that even make life possible, a system that valued those things would look very, very different from the kind of system we have where we value competition and acquisition and control over life itself. So the takeaway here is simply changing how we all think and what we value is the most powerful and lasting way to change systems. For better or for worse, our worldviews are super impactful. So that's like, this is when people talk about system change, the easiest thing to take away is we need to shift how we think about this. And sometimes we do have to pay attention to all these other levels, but if we're not actually paying attention to these value-based leverage points, these are going to have short-term small effects and not the big effects that we want them to have. So that's one model, that's one whipping through. The next model is the Iceberg model, and I chose to go on the internet and find somebody explaining this as succinctly as possible, and I don't know who this is, but I'm going to share it with you.
The iceberg is a tool we use in systems thinking. What it's trying to describe is actually a few
Let me check. Can everybody hear it? Okay, thanks.
things. Up here, we have the tip of the iceberg. Some people call this the event. If we're operating at the events level, or some people would call it the symptoms level. If we're operating based on what we see right in front of us, then we're operating at the tip of the iceberg level, and we are only in a position to react after the fact to what we can see. You go a little bit further under the surface here to the trends and patterns that created that situation, you're going to be better able to respond. Go even deeper to the structures and the designs and the behaviors that are causing the trends and patterns that ultimately result in the events is a design challenge. And then down here you have the thinking that drove those designs, that created those patterns that ultimately ended up in an event. And that's where the transformation is. It's in the thinking. Now, a mental model is a term we use as systems thinkers. If you are an innovator, you would use the term paradigm. If you're a cognitive linguist, you'd use the term frame. If you're a brain scientist, you would use the term mental map. It's literally the map of existing neural pathways in your brain. It's the sum total of everything you've thought about and all the connections you've made up until this moment.
Okay, so this is just another version of the iceberg model. And
So the iceberg is one of the key tools in systems thinking.
I kept doing that when I was
Yes.
trying. Okay, sorry about that. So what the iceberg model is doing is a couple things. One is it's reinforcing this idea that the mental models, the paradigms, are what drive all of the, what create and define all of these other layers of a system, and create what we see. And so that just looking at what we see isn't going to actually shift a whole lot if we don't dig down into those mental models. But what's new in this model from the Donella Meadows model, so it's reinforcing that bit from Donella Meadows, but it's adding two other pieces that I think are important. One is the concept of patterns and how patterns are one of the bridges between the mental models. Like patterns can help us begin to discern what's going on with those mental models because they're shaped by the mental models. And also, in patterns didn't show up in Donella Meadows' thing. But the other thing is to note that if we look at it from the perspective of the iceberg, we can see that mental models are the most hidden part of the whole system. So on Donella Meadows' fulcrum, we've got all these things, and we can see, there's higher leverage at the upper right, but it's not making it clear how hidden that is and how hard it is to understand that. So that's what the iceberg helps us keep in mind. Those mental models are way below the surface, generally speaking. So how this is relevant to a social system mapping is if we're going to work in collaborative networks, we're putting a whole lot of weight on the relational dynamics of the network. And relational dynamics are something that we're not used to seeing. We can see the symptoms, but until recently, we never really had a tool or a map or a way of reflecting that made it easy for us to see the relational patterns, the patterns of relationships. And so in the context of transformation networks, as change agents, we need to be able to see beneath the surface and beneath the symptoms or the visible dynamics and be able to look into the patterns and to be able to see those patterns together, especially across the different perspectives. People have different truths about what's going on the surface, and to help everybody see the pattern together so that they're not just arguing from their own different lenses, but they're able to see, okay, yeah, this is a pattern of relationships here. And we can agree, yep, we can see this pattern here. So for instance, I've been involved in a whole lot of groups where some people believe like, oh, this is a really diverse and inclusive group, but then other people don't feel like it's at all diverse and inclusive. And in both cases, that perspective is being defined in relation to those very personal mental models and historical experiences and worldviews, and which leaves a lot of room for disagreement. But if we can look at a map and see who's connected to who and who's not connected to who, then we can say, okay, but here's a pattern of relationships. We can all agree that this pattern exists because we can see it on the map, and then we can begin to make inferences about what those patterns mean, and we can do that together in a conversation. So we can try to surface the underlying beliefs and paradigms that make us think differently about it. And so, for instance, why does this pattern feel inclusive to some of us and not to others? And how do our different mental models inform that difference? And what can we do to understand each other better? So that's one kind of simplistic example, but this is where a social system map can help us by helping us to visualize and see the actual patterns in our networks and begin to make changes in the relational patterns that we can see so that we can be more effective. So that's about the separate self paradigm. One way a social system map can help us undermine the separate self paradigm. But as I said, networks are also difficult because of the mechanistic worldview. And in fact, a mechanistic worldview doesn't even realize that there's a deeper paradigm that created that machine view in the first place. And so it's incapable of knowing that there even is a paradigm. And so it's incapable of shifting that paradigm. So to get at that, this is my last little model I'm going to whip you through. I'm going to have Glenda Ouyang of the founder of Human Systems Dynamics. I found a piece of her explaining what a complex adaptive system is, and I added some graphics to it. So I doctored this, but I'm gonna have Glenda explain this to you herself. Oops, hang on. Oh yeah, that's fine.
You had also mentioned complex adaptive systems a little earlier. Can you explain the concept of that and how that again fits into adaptive action?
Yes. So one of the threads that feeds into human systems dynamics is a history of systems sciences and systems thinking. So in the US, people tend to think about one particular kind of systems language, systems dynamics modeling. But around the world, other people use many other ways to think and talk about systems. The one that we find to be most useful with human systems is called complex.
You
Agents.
mute your sound, Christine.
Or they may
The
be
sound of the video
business,
goes.
or they may be ideas
Okay.
that interact with each other. And as they interact, a pattern shows up. And once the pattern is there, it influences how the agents behave in the future. Now, let me give you an example. If you think about culture in this way, you can see that culture of individuals and procedures and policies and histories and traditions and identities and customers, all of them interacting and interacting. And over time, a pattern shows up that we would recognize as culture. And once that institutional culture begins to form, it constrains how people are going to behave in the future. So when some new employee comes in, it doesn't take them long to fall into the patterns that are culture in a place, and then they reinforce that. If an employee comes who doesn't fit the culture, it's very hard for them to feel comfortable in the cycle of this complex adaptive process. So complex adaptive system is a collection of agents that interact in unpredictable ways, create patterns that influence how the system acts in the future. One of the most important things about complex adaptive systems in human systems is that they work at all the different levels where people interact. So I can think about the complex adaptive systems inside myself. Physically, my cells act together to create organs, and my organs together to create systems, and the systems act together to create health. So at all those different scales, physically, we have complex adaptive systems. And I can think of a relationship. My 32-year marriage was definitely an emergent pattern over interactions over time. And teams. You can think about a high-performing team as a pattern that emerges, or an organization, or an industry. We do lots of work with national patterns of conflict or oppression, or the kinds of relationships that political structures take as emergent patterns from interactions of agents. So you can find one way to think about things that works across many different contexts and levels. So that's a complex adaptive system.
Okay, so that was our last model that I'm wrapping up this whipping through models in a moment. But so the last model was the human systems dynamics model of how complex adaptive systems work. Now, this one doesn't address paradigms at all. And that's because from this perspective, what you need is simply to understand, is to be able to see and understand and influence the patterns at this level that then create the patterns at this level that then reinforce the patterns back into the system. So shifting the patterns can help to shift the paradigm, even if you're not thinking what is the paradigm, which will in turn shift the interactions. So it's fractal. And we don't need to worry about the huge scale system if we can understand how to be generative at the scale that we're actually engaged in. So one of the most constant and fundamental practices that we use in systems change, in human systems dynamics, is to get good at seeing and understanding and influencing patterns. In other words, we abandon the mechanistic view of change and adopt a complex adaptive system praxis. And we need to do that at all scales, from the individual to the global. And we can use different models or methods or different lenses into thinking about the patterns. But at the scale of a social change network, a social system map is perfectly designed to help us identify patterns at the network scale that we couldn't see in any other way, so that we can begin to work more effectively together, so that we're using that map both as a means of seeing the patterns and also helping us to understand how complex change is, how complex our networks are, how complex is the work, and to start to work with that in a more effective way, as opposed to just thinking if we just all go force the one person who's got all the power to push the one button that's going to change everything, which history has shown us isn't all that effective. So the last piece of this is Glenda at HSD is a set of pattern spotters. This is very simple, very accessible, but it's just a set of questions that we use when we're looking at anything that seems complex and big and overwhelming. How do we sort of begin to break it down and see what there is to see there? Or in other words, sometimes I'll show people a map and they're like, patterns, I don't know what you're talking about. There's too much moving around. What do you even mean? So this is stuff that we can apply to a social system map. So the first question in general, this question helps us to identify the dominant themes. What's the same amongst most of us? What's the main thing that's going on? Now, a thing that's interesting to think about is that this is where most of us stop and settle into our confirmation bias. So I'll go like, oh yeah, I see people are pretty comfortable. Let's move forward, and I'll totally miss the one person that's really getting upset because they're feeling left behind. So, we'll just sort of go, yeah, that's what I thought, and move on. In general, helps us see the main themes, but on its own, it's not enough. On the other hand, the second question, what are the contradictions that we're looking for? So this is where we can start to be confronted. If we're looking for the contradictions, we can start to be confronted by the differences or the tensions, the things that don't confirm with our easy assumptions. This is moving us towards our blind spots. Then there's the surprises. What's unexpected? What didn't I think was going on? And I didn't think that I would see that. This also can help us point to our blind spots or point out something that's missing from our perspective. Or it might be pointing to something that's new, that's just emerging, that we should be, noticing and starting to pay attention to, and which we might not notice if we just stay in our confirmation bias. And then wonder, what do you wonder? This actually starts to move us into deeper exploration. So wondering is sort of like a deepening question. So I've seen these questions from Glenda a lot and I've used them a lot, but just like as I was really thinking about the pattern spotters, I started to see, oh, there's a really deep intentionality going on in there that I didn't notice when I was first introduced to them. So I wanted to point that out. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because this is my confirmation bias. I have this assumption that everybody is like bored to death and wants me to get back to something more interactive and or like less conceptual. And so I need to pause and just see where we're all at cognitively so that we can be aware of the differences in the space and help people feel comfortable. So if you go back to your Mentimeter input place and just answer how you're feeling right now. So someone is overwhelmed. I'm sorry about that. Whoever is feeling overwhelmed or confused, I would propose that you when we go into the breakouts in a minute, let your other breakout people know that and let them help answer your questions and help you find something that can orient you, because frankly, that's what the others are here for. Those of us who are familiar with social system mapping, they're here to help, they're here to connect, and they're here to get practice explaining this stuff. So that's actually part of their purpose. So take advantage of that. And I see that most of you are ready to apply it to this EOP, and there's a little teeny bit of boredom going on. So I'm always assuming we're at the max of the boredom. Just goes to show my bias. Okay, I'm gonna move us to, we're gonna move into breakout rooms again. I'm gonna give you 15 minutes this time. Don't go yet. We're gonna ask you to open up the social system map and pick one of the views, either the offers and asks view or the involvement view. I think those are the best two to use. Pick one of them and go through that view together and apply the pattern spotters. So in general, looking at that map, what do you notice? What contradictions? What on the other hand, from what you notice, what's there? What surprises you, and what do you wonder? And just take your time and don't feel like there's any correct answers, or if you don't see anything, just lean on the others, and we'll come back in 15 minutes and talk about it. So is any questions? Welcome back, everyone. Okay. So when I sent you off into your breakout rooms, I was going to tell you, you could put what you were seeing in Mentimeter, like I put places for that. And I was going to invite you to do that while you were talking, but I forgot to. But so what I'm going to do now is just, I'm going to open it up and sort of go through the questions and hear from you. But I have set the Mentimeter so that you guys can move back and forth in the slides now. So if you go to the slide of, in general, I notice you can start to put, and then you can move to the next slide and go back if you need to. So if people could input what they're hearing, because it's really valuable to have captured all of this, as well as, so input what you're hearing or put your own thoughts in as others are talking or whatever. Those 4 slides are there for that, and you can move back and forth. So I'm glad that Elise felt supported by Mary and Sarah and Sonia. That's good to know. And yeah, so, and the other thing is, I'm gonna debating whether I should share my screen so that you can see what people are inputting, or if we should just not share screen so that we can see each other. And I think we'll just not, and I'll hope that people put input things into the Mentimeter as we go. But so let's just start with, what kind of general things did you notice about whatever your view was? And I'm just going to open it up. Whoever wants to add stuff, go right ahead.
I could start. So there was Osnat and Peter in our and myself in the breakout group. Osnat had to leave, but can report at least some of the patterns she shared with us. So I think one of the things she shared right at the start was this surprise. So she shared she's surprised, like with this map, but also with another map that she mentioned in a network that she's engaged in. She's surprised that people join the map, but then they don't really they don't necessarily, or not all of them, do something after that initial step to form other connections or have some kind of exchange or collaborative action of sorts. So that was a surprise that she've mentioned, and also a kind of pattern, seeing that there are a bunch of people who don't really have any connections to anybody. They're like floating around in the involvement map. So that was one thing. And I think based on that, I was also like wondering, how can we support a kind of conversion in how invested and engaged people are? What draws people to kind of step in closer or step up more, or what moves people to step back in a sense in the engagement? Also based on noticing that there are very different levels of engagement, and we've used the filters around that, and was interesting to see that people really working with social system mapping is just a small number of people, and then learning and kind of invested in learning more is actually quite a large number of people, and then there's others who are more kind of curious. So we were also wondering, like, how can we leverage that to focus a lot on the learning, which apparently many people are showing up for, at least based on the map we have right now, and then also this possible conversion or kind of positive feedback loop around the engagement, let's say. So this was something. Definitely also kind of contradictions or differences in, the level of investment, how engaged and connected people are, who's collaborating and who's just an acquaintance or has no connections, at least not reported on the map, and the difference in the probably also the motivation and the purpose that people have showing up. We didn't go through the profiles to like figure it out in more detail, but that was another thing. I'll leave it at that for now. Some of our patterns.
Yeah, thanks. Someone else?
Well, Sarah, as our master pattern spotter pointed out kind of a little side doggy network that was like emerging, and like kind of looking into like that little side network and kind of who's there and who are the bridge makers there. Also, one person in the group had the perspective that things were kind of shifted since over time, that it looked like there was more happening that wasn't putting you, Christine, you're still right at the center, and Sarah was saying that like it's hard to move from the center like once you're in the center, but that kind of the intentional work you do to kind of connect other people so that you're not always like a potential bottleneck, or just like the person that people have to go through. So Mary was saying that it looked like it had changed, like there was more of that happening around. But another person who was kind of newer to the map still saw that perspective of you being at the center, so like kind of different, where people looking at the map over the long term or just being introduced to it kind of have different views or different perceptions of it. Sarah also pointed out this kind of a connection between two people, and maybe Sarah, you could finish your thought now because you got cut off, but that it was someone who thinks that their relationship is stronger than the other person is an instructive thing, which I didn't know anything about, and I would love to hear more about that, Sarah, if you could finish that thought by any chance here.
Yeah, and here I'll do a quick screen share to maybe illustrate what I was looking at here. We had noticed, oh no, I don't remember which view, so that's actually useless, sorry. We had noticed that two people had a relationship. One had ranked them higher than the other. And I said, that's actually a really point of interesting conversation for folks, because there could actually be no difference in the relationship, but the perspective from each other is a little bit different. And the story I was going to share is like, this actually happened with me and Tim, Christine's partner, on a map, where we had rated each other differently. Like Tim had rated our relationship like as like, yeah, we work in partnership all the time. And I had said, yeah, I talk to Tim once in a while. And it was just a difference in our relationship. So from Tim's perspective, he's like, yeah, like I'm dealing with Sarah's maps all the time. Like I feel like I'm working with her all the time. And from my perspective, it was like, well, I'm actually working with Christine more, who is then working with Tim to do the map work. So it was just like an interesting conversation that like came up as a result of seeing that on the map. And it actually like caused me to change my behavior. Like we had been at a meeting together. And so like I went out of my way to like go sit down and have lunch with Tim one day, so we could kind of like talk about this and tease it out. So it can like be a sore spot because, you could look at that and be like, wow, how could Sarah not think that like we have a great working relationship? But really, like after having a conversation, it was like, oh no, like we just had different feelings about it just based on our experience.
Thanks for that. Also, I wrote a blog post about that very pair of relationships. If you want to dig in my blog about Tim's perspective and Sarah's perspective, and how we can think about that as a general thing within our networks, like how that pattern can actually enable us to think differently and see more clearly into the relational structure of the networks. Other patterns. So I'm noticing we're not going to just general. We'll just if people would have the capacity to put things into any of those slides, that would be great. But other just what you noticed, what you thought about, what came up for you in the pattern spotting activity together.
Well, I've looked at the profiles a lot, and so what I've noticed is that generally people, just about everyone in this community is involved in social change and interested in creating new forms and ways of working, which is really gratifying to be part of this community.
Yes. I say I get to work with the coolest people in the world. That's what I love about my work. It's I get to meet and work with the coolest people. Yeah.
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 And maybe a little bit of a contradiction would be in some of the profiles, a few it's more coming from the old story of, oh, in my profile, I need to put who I am, sort of the ego network picture. So there's the ego network and the eco network sort of, not really a contradiction, but seeing both things. And then the just last thing is there are many people from so many different fields. There are researchers, social activists, food systems, climate change, just a lot, which brings us to that we're all part of one movement in a way, of Paul Hawkins' Blessed Unrest picture. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else? Things that haven't been brought up yet that you noticed that no one has spoken to, or something you want to deepen? Sonia?
Well, I had just asked, like, how do you get people, you know, they'll do the initial survey or whatever, but like, how do you really get people to go back in there? And just like Sarah wrote in the chat box, so we had a discussion around like, how do you keep that data fresh and up to date? And Mary and Sarah just had some really good strategies for how they do that. You know, adding a new question and using incentives. And Sarah had some really good like in-person work that she'd done with folks at their annual meetings and such, that it was almost like that the activity she talked about was almost like creating a visual map I pictured in my head with like people, and seeing who are moving toward the center and who are still on the periphery, and how that illuminated kind of some disparities and like who was at the center of the network, largely, you know, white people who'd been around for a while, and then just using how they use the map, you know, to tell stories, to get people engaged and keeping that data up to date. So I thought those were really helpful and interesting strategies.
To that, does anybody on our emergent fledgling our community of practice mapping team want to talk about what our intentions are for our so one thing I like about our map that I see is that we are both having the intentionality of moving into this like new paradigm, and clearly the structure of the map tells us we're not there. We have a long way to go, and we're trying to shift from the old story to the new story, and we're kind of like, maybe sometimes it feels to me like kind of stuck in the middle without either side. But we do have a handful of people who are in this meeting who are talking about how can we bring our map more to life and how can we engage that more. And I just want to open it up to any of you who are present if you want to just talk about that briefly, what we're planning on doing and how we're thinking about that. Because the rest of you will probably notice it, hopefully. The goal is for you to notice it at some point in time.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to sit there and grin at us, you guys?
Well,
You go ahead, Mary.
oh, well, I already spoke, so I thought someone else should. But I'll just give my 2 cents that clearly if we're dealing with the issue that Sonia talked about of the data being fresh and the map being alive, that if we can't do it within this community, then yeah, I'll just end there. Yeah.
Looks like
But
go
to be
ahead.
fair, you know, the idea that this is a community practice is still, you know, a fairly new effort to really, you know, for us to come together and energize together. And Christine and Tim, you know, created this software to, you know, that's super powerful. And the focus has been, you know, on getting that software to work well and supporting people who want to apply it. So, you know, I came in here not so much thinking I'm becoming a member of a community practice as much as that I want to make maps. And, you know, Jim helped me make my first map with support from Christine and Tim. And now I've made 3 maps, and, you know, now it's like along the way, I've learned how to do this more and seen more of what it can do. And now I'm really interested in developing it as a community practice, which also happens to be where a lot of my work is, you know, in how we develop communities of practice and use them to move resources and create change. So, so I found a group of people that were offering something useful to me in the beginning, and now that, you know, I see clearly are really aligned with a lot of the other work I want to do in the world, and that this could be a, you know, a central part of that. And so one of the things we're going to be doing soon, starting maybe even this week or next, is one-on-one appreciative interviews with people that are on the map already. Some that are in the center, some sort of in the mid zone, some out on the periphery, to get a sense of, you know, how connected they feel to a community of practice, or to you know, what their work is now, what's alive in it, whether the map could reflect that better and update their profiles, but also see if they want to get involved in different ways, potentially in deepening our set of connections and in how we use the map. Because we also know we're only using a fraction of the functionality of what the maps can offer. Like, one huge category is there's no organizations on there yet. And that's even without these interviews. You know, Christine's had that on her list for a long time as sort of something else to add, which wasn't originally part of what sumApp could do, but I don't know, was it a year, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, maybe that capacity?
Year and a half ago, yeah. Roughly year.
You can have 2 entirely different categories of thing on there, you know, people and organizations or other kinds of entities. I've used it to map projects and groups and teams and things, as well as individuals. And you can have a whole set of things and code them differently depending on what sort of an entity they are. So, and then another thing I think we heard somebody else was mentioning, and in our group we talked about this too, is how you use the map iteratively with dialogue. Sarah, you were talking about that, right? And what we heard in the report, that you create a map, you use some kind of engagement or process to create the map and gather the data that may have some other function besides just that, right? But a map gets generated from people getting together and doing some stuff or talking about stuff. Then you use the map as support for the next round of that getting together and doing and talking. And then you map what happens from that and how that evolves, and keep a cycle going of mapping engagement. So that's part of what I'm excited about to see going forward.
Yeah, and just thank you, Ben, for that. And Jim, let me just say one thing, Jim, and then we'll go to you. But Kara is putting, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, and I'm trying to get in the habit of doing this, but I forgot to. Kara is putting links to getting your link so you can update the map if you're already updated, if you're already on it, and if you're not on it, a link so that you can put yourself on the map. And this just speaks to a practice, like a mental habit that we have to get into, which is whenever we're connecting, to find ways to bring it up and to invite people to keep it up to date and to refer to it, because it's not going to do much on its own. Jim, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a quick hit that Ben was talking about, doing these appreciative interviews, and that's coming from the core right now of us thinking about that. But what if that was a culture change, that in fact we're thinking about the network as something where each one of us is a network weaver, connecting intentionally with other people on the map on a regular basis, not just viewing it, but really going in there and creating relationship with people as we explore and are curious about each other and the resources that we have. But that culture shift where everybody is thinking as a network weaver, as opposed to a few network weavers looking at the whole community. I think there's a both and there, that both functions are powerful, but just a thought.
So we're just at the top of the bottom of the half hour. So I want to just point out that if you have the Mentimeter link open, there's a series of just sort of reflection feedback questions at the end. So if you have feedback to share, I would encourage you to go do that after we're done. Want to see if there's any last thing that someone who hasn't spoken at all yet would like to speak into the space, or just share whatever's up for them. So we'll.
Well, let me just say that I'm new to this group, and so I I'm still playing catch up with your conversations and your references, which is an interesting experience. I didn't realize that you were an established kind of regular meeting group that has created this map, and that you're actually, as a group, which you've created the map, analyzing it. So I felt like removed in a sense from the conversation completely, and even and not really understanding your level of investment in what you're doing. So forgive me for that, but I didn't really get any pre-meeting awareness of that through any communication or even registering. I mean, I'm familiar with NetWeaver because I knew Holly a long time ago. But so I'm still a bit confused, quite frankly, about your intentionalities and your purpose, which isn't really clear to me. So anyway, that's just sort of a little bit of feedback from me, I guess.
Thanks. That speaks to my affirmation biases. So, so that's good, always good for me to be reminded of, and thank you for that. Does anybody else who hasn't spoken have anything they want to add before jumping off? And I'm guessing Peter's experience is not unique to him, but is common amongst people who are new to this context. But if it's not, you can, that's something else is cool to hear too. Okay, so thank you all. See you all. Hope I see all of you. Kate, do you want to add something? Or you just letting us see your lovely face as we say goodbye?
Just popping in visually.
Thank you.
Wave physically as we say goodbye.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you all. Okay, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.